I affectionately refer to the South Carolina farce of information act. We have one of the weakest, if not the weakest, FOI law in the country. I've been dealing with it for about 15 years that I've been in this state, and it's not gotten any easier now compared to when I first started. One of the problems, I don't know if how many of you, just out of curiosity, have actually looked at the FOI law? A little bit. Maybe about a third. The fastest way to find it, do y'all know how to get to the South Carolina Legislation? You know how to get to the website. You can find it on there on the Code of Laws. It's kind of, if you look under Title 30, Chapter 4, that's where it's at. You can also easily, if you go to the South Carolina Press Association website, I think it's scpress.org, you'll see on the right-hand side, it'll say FOIA. You can go there and actually call it up, download it, and it's all right there. So, in South Carolina, first of all, to file a Freedom of Information Act, a lot of people think that it's very difficult. It's not. There's not any real set form. All you need to do is basically write a letter, and in many cases, just an email saying, the following request is made under the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. Boom. And then just ask what you're, state what you'd like to see or what you'd like to make copies of. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need a Freedom of Information Act if everything was posted, if we had ultimate transparency. But we don't live in an ideal world. We're getting a little bit better now. Our Comptroller General has a transparency website in which a lot of information about the state and local spending is online, but it's not, in my opinion, doesn't even scratch the surface of what's out there. So we're going to have to use the Freedom of Information Act, I think, for some time. Once you file, whether you snail mail it or email it or fax it, our law requires that the public agency respond to you within 15 business days, which actually is 3 calendar weeks. It doesn't include holidays, so, and what that means, and this is one of the big weaknesses in the law, what that means is all they have to do is tell you whether they're going to give you the information that you're requesting, whether it's available. There is no deadline for you to get it. So I've, in some cases, waited months to get information that an agency has said, we're going to give it to you. So that's a big weakness. Another huge weakness, if you read through the law, is that there are many exemptions. And public agencies love to use these exemptions all the time to deny access to records. One of the favorite that I deal a lot with the State Department of Commerce. They love to black out a lot of things, give me blank sheets of paper saying this is all proprietary information relating to business. They don't explain what exactly that information is, but that's what they use to deny me records all the time. So one of the things I think that's important when you're filing an FOI request is this. There's an attitude I have found, it's not just state agencies, but local agencies as well, that this information belongs to them, when in fact it belongs to you. And I think when you make a request, if you're doing it in person, for example, or you're actually writing a letter, if you make it clear to them that you know the law, especially when you're dealing with clerks, a lot of times that will help in terms of getting information. They can sniff out folks who know nothing about the law, and they will take full advantage of it. So I would encourage those who want to really use the FOI, and I'm not an attorney, So I've just had my head kicked in for 27 plus years to know, at least learn a few things on how to make it work. But if you try to, try to learn it and understand it, it'll make it a little bit easier when you're dealing with clerks. I don't know if anybody, if there's some good news about the FOI, there is an effort in the legislature to try to improve it. There's a bill by Representative Taylor that would, for example, reduce the number of days to respond from 15 business days to 10. He would put a deadline on giving most records for 30 days. It would limit the cost of copies to what the actual cost was, and also would limit searches to the lowest paid person who could do that search. One of the big problems we have with the FOI is the charges that come with it. We did a story at the NERV a few months ago. We surveyed 25 state agencies and asked them what they're charging for FOI. We got a wide variety of things. We got Department of Revenue charging $1 a page. When we checked with local Kinkos, it was like 10 to 15 cents range. We also asked on what their hourly search fees were. We got DMV said in certain cases they would charge $110 an hour if they felt they had to do a programming change. Commerce routinely charges $45 an hour to look. And it's, for obviously most folks, it's cost prohibitive, but that's one of the things that they do to try to limit or deny you from seeing that information. So these are some of the things that at least there's some legislation that might address that. One of the big weaknesses, however, with the legislation proposed, it deals nothing with the legislative exemption in the law right now. There's a little part of the law that allows state lawmakers to deny releasing any of their correspondence. And the current legislation doesn't deal with that. Last year, there was an amendment put on a similar bill, and that bill died. But I think that the legislative exemption is something that needs to go away for the most part. But it's not in this bill. Whether it's going to be part of a standalone bill, I don't know. But I learned right away when we launched the NERV a little more than 3 years ago about the legislative exemption, because I was asking for all emails and other correspondence for lawmakers involved with the Boeing incentives deal, and was told then, we're not giving you anything because we're exempt. So that's something to be aware of as well.
When you were talking about the cost, say you submit a request, did they tell you the cost up front, or do they give you your information and then give you
a bill?
A bill.
Well, what I do, they do it both ways. What I do is I ask them, please give me a cost, estimate in advance. Okay. If, for example, you, under the FOI, if you're not using the information for commercial purposes, you're not a business, okay? You're citizen journalists, you can ask them to, waive the fees. Will they do it? Probably not. But you might be able to get them at least some negotiating down. One of the ways you can try to reduce your fees is this. You have a right under the FOI to not only receive copies, but also to inspect records. And so one of the things that you can do when you start is, if you don't know what you want, just write an FOI saying, I'd like to inspect these records. And then you can decide from there which ones you'd like to have a copy. So that's a way to try to reduce the cost. Questions on the FOI at all?
I have a question. What does NERV stand for?
NERV.
Didn't you just say that?
Oh, I apologize for those who don't. The NERV. That's the name of our website.
Oh, okay.
I apologize about that.
Okay.
I'm the editor of the NERV. The NERV is a product of the South Carolina Policy Council. So we're an online investigative news site. We've been up and running for a little over 3 years. We're founded at nerd.org. We cover, we're located in the office of the Policy Council, which is only about a block away from the circus, the State House. And we focus a lot on state government, but we don't limit ourselves to that. We have parachuted in to local communities and done investigative pieces there when asked, and when we have some time to do that as well. So, and in terms of the FOI, since we've launched, on average, the NERV files at least probably, one FOI request a week to some agency, state or local, seeking information. So, if they were all cooperative, we would have to do that.
Probably one that's more local government than anything else, and Greenville County is one of the primary ones. In my business as an insurance adjuster, I do structural losses, fires, and all that. That anytime you go over and try to get a police report or a fire report, you have to file an FOI in order to get it. Now, this is not in all counties. Spartanburg is usually pretty different, as long as I properly identify myself as the need for it, and of course pay the $1 or $2, whatever it is, charge on it. But now, do we have more? Since I don't really mind more of the upstate, I haven't really had that many encounters with other counties. But it looks like local governments are trying to take advantage of that. I would think just trying to make it aggravating, because a lot of times I end up just telling the insurance to go get your report. I have to have it before I won't pay any money.
Yeah.
So
well,
I get it quick, but
I spent most of my career as a police reporter, so I've dealt a lot with police reports. In South Carolina, they're supposed to show you incident reports upon request. In fact, what you need to do is not only ask for the cover sheet, but ask for the supplemental report as well. That's where the good stuff is. That's where the narrative is. And a lot of times they don't want to give you that. One of the favorite exemptions that law enforcement uses under the FOI is that it's everything's under investigation. Well, they use that so broadly, they deny everything. And I think a lot of times they go overboard with doing that. But that's, it's important to have. And it's not just police, but for example, if you want to know how your local ambulance service is responding to emergencies, there has been a move over the past several years, for example, to limit those reports under federal HIPAA laws. Well, a lot of media outlets have made the argument on that we're not asking for folks' medical records. We just want to see pure response times for these ambulance services. So again, if there's something that's supported by tax dollars, then I think taxpayers have a right to know how those police agencies, fire agencies, ambulance services are operating.
It would seem that the executive session would be a great way for an agency to do a lot of things that would then be exempt from our ability to get to the information, because I know they're not supposed to make decisions in executive session, but is there any way to really check on whether the executive session option is being abused? Or is that just one of those things that's behind the curtain and you can't know?
I have found the only way to find that if it's being abused is somebody's going to blab at some point that, yeah, we were just chatting in there and we made the decision to just came out and and made our vote.
That's happened, yeah.
And that's a problem. They're not supposed to, for example, they're not supposed to do that under the FOI. They're not supposed to make decisions via email or texting each other. They can't use other ways outside of the open meetings to make those kinds of decisions. But a lot of times, unfortunately, they do. Under the Freedom of Information Act, there's an open meeting section, and when a public body is going into that, they are supposed to, under the law, announce the purpose why they're going, and they're limited purposes. Okay, for example, contract negotiations, disciplinary matters, if they're hiring somebody and they're in negotiations with that, those are things that are allowed under the law. But they're supposed to state that. A lot of times what they do, and I've had this, I spent many years covering local governments, a lot of times they'll just stand up and say, well, we're going into executive session now.
That's what they
Yeah,
do.
that's what.
And they're not allowed to do that. And I think what you need to do, again, I'm not an attorney, but here's what I've done. I've stood up and I identified myself as a journalist and said, well, under the Freedom of Information Act, you need to state on the record what your purpose is. At least do that. You can't just say, go into executive session and do that. And there have been times when I've challenged folks, bodies going into executive session.
How
Yes?
do you do that?
Huh?
How do you challenge something like that?
I'll stand up and say that I believe that it's illegal under the act, and I respectfully request that you not go in until I can contact our attorney to get him here and deal with the matter further. And I've done that before I came and helped launch the NERV. I was at the state newspaper for about a dozen years as their legal issues writer, and I did that once during a heated disciplinary procedure involving a fairly well-known solicitor. So, and they held it up until we could get our attorney there. We still lost, but at least they respected the rule of law and allowed me to at least get our attorney there to do that.
A number of years ago, Greenville County Council did not like the fact that we had 350 plus angry citizens in the council meeting on a specific issue involving property rights. So they decided to go into executive session, and the stated purpose was to receive legal counsel. I think they really thought that they would have their executive session long enough to wait out most of the people.
Right.
So we just kind of sort of, while they were going out to executive session in another room, we just started having our own tea party meeting in their chamber, discussing very openly about replacing any of them that voted against property rights. And it was amazing how short that executive session was.
I take it they heard you through
Yes.
the closed doors?
Yes.
Didn't use the mic, we commandeered the microphones. didn't we?
Yes, we did. We volunteered the microphone.
Well, that's
executive.
a brilliant move, because I've sat for hours
Yeah.
waiting for an executive session to finally get out. Yes, under the State Freedom of Information Act, matters involving attorney-client privilege are considered exempt. The problem is that I found in recent years is that they will use that as an excuse to deny a lot of things. They'll say, well, because our attorney may even be involved with this, that potentially could be attorney-client privilege matter, and therefore we're not going to give you it. And that's another way I think that they abuse the system as well. You have to be really vigilant, and because if you're not, they're just going to take advantage of you all the time.
Right.
I wish it weren't the case. I spend a lot of my time at the NERV in frustration dealing with FOI requests and FOI matters. I had the chief attorney of a major state agency in the past couple of weeks accused me of abusing it by my frequent requests for information. I had to tell her that I didn't think it was the FOI allowed her to make judgments about whether something was worthy of being on the FOI. She just had to comply with the law. Other questions about anything, FOI or other related stuff?
Rick, are you finding over time that they're starting to actually respect what you're doing, or are you finding them trying to dig in their heels and become more recalcitrant?
I think that they've known, now that we've been around for more than 3 years, that we're not going away, but they still fight us a lot. I get routinely calls not returned. They know we've been accused of essentially, someone used the phrase that we're prosecutorial in our approach. I would say we're very aggressive in trying to, root out waste, fraud, and corruption.
They're suggesting you should consider them innocent until proven guilty.
Under the rule of law, yes, in a criminal situation, they are innocent until proven guilty. I'm not writing in a criminal forum. I'm trying to find out information, and I do tend to go with the mindset that usually they are trying to hide stuff from me. So, and I will be very aggressive in trying to dig that out, and that's a natural conflict that that will happen, and they'll try to fight you on it. So I think if they know you're not going to go away, though, sooner or later, I think they're going to at least have some measure of respect for you. Yeah.
Hi. Would you see it as perhaps it's more effective in terms of research if you maintain a healthy skepticism and yet at the same time don't kind of write the end of the scenario? Kind of writing the final chapter
Right.
is sort of a dangerous research process, I think.
Well, news stories, in large part, are snapshots of what's going on at that time. So, when I'm doing a story, for example, I'm looking at the circumstances as they exist right then. I'm not trying to project, I guess, some utopia conclusion down at the end. So I'm dealing with the fight that's right in front of me at the moment. There are a lot of them. Any other questions? Yeah.
What can we do to help you? I mean, I'm not trying to, the thing of it is, all right, I mean, you put on a good fight. And the thing of it is, I mean, I've kind of been brushing along the edges of the Tea Party for the last couple of years from the first rally out of Greenville. Why was it over Greenville Tea Party? I have no idea. But what can we do to help? I mean, you're fighting a good fight, but, there's a lot more of us, and how can we help?
Well, one of the things that we have done at the NERV since the beginning is we have our own citizen reporter component. These are folks who live, around the state in their own communities and who care very deeply about improving how government works. And there are a variety of ways in which they participate. There are those who write viewpoint columns for us. There are others who just do research for us. Those who want to cover their own local government, meetings and maybe give us a report on that. We can, accommodate them there as well. That helps me in terms of, and what we're doing in terms of our mission, if you look on our website, is it says where government gets exposed. So the more bodies we have out there, the better. My vision I'd like to see is at least have at least one citizen reporter in each of our 46 counties. So the more folks who want to volunteer and want to participate in that, the better, I think. Because how that helps us is it's not just what they're doing, but it's also what they're feeding us in terms of what's going on at their local level. A lot of times they're in touch with the local legislative delegation, so we can get an idea from what's going on in those areas. We've had a number of great initiatives from pushing for more local delegation meetings to invite the public, to initiatives that would require roll call voting at the subcommittee levels, instead of, we do have roll call voting now on the floor of the House and Senate, but a lot of the dirty work is done in the subcommittee and committee meetings, and we have a citizen reporter initiative to try to get that changed. So those are the kinds of things that would help us as well. So we have, and on our website, you can go to our website and see how the various ways to participate if you want to do that. I guess my philosophy is, I try to meet the person where they're at. Not everybody wants to be more of a traditional journalist. There are those who want to participate in a variety of ways. So I just, whatever you want to do, it is something I hope I could work with you with.
Since you're here, sir, I wonder if you could kind of give us an assessment on a personal level. How bad is it? And maybe also give us some hope.
How bad is what?
Well, that's only you fill in the blank.
You want how bad is corruption in South Carolina government?
Yes, sir.
I think this may sound kind of strange, but I think there's a lot of what I call legal corruption going on. The way the system is set up, you have a lot of things that in law are legal to do, but give a lot of advantage to individual lawmakers and their own personal interests. And they're not in the best interest, I believe, of the citizenry. And that's a problem that you have. Do you have people who may be engaged in outright, criminal acts? Yeah, I think so too. But I think the larger problem is just the way the system has been structured. I sat in a budget control board meeting a few months ago, and there was a debate going on about kind of the pension and health system for state employees. And during the debate, Senator Leatherman, who was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and one of the members of the Budget Control Board said at one point, well, we're a legislative state. And see, I'm not an attorney, but I always think back to the Article 1 of our state constitution that says there are 3 separate and distinct branches. I guess the Constitution doesn't say that they're all co-equal, and the legislature believes that they rule. And so you get a whole structure in terms of not just statute, but their own rules, giving them an advantage in a lot of ways. And I pointed this out, for example, in the latest article I did on Bobby Harrell. If Harrell, for example, were the subject of a House Ethics Committee complaint, the way state law is set up right now, it says he gets the investigative report. If he doesn't like what they say, for example, he can, he has to call the body as a whole together, to let them decide whether to uphold the committee's recommendations or not. It's just, the way the law is structured, there's nothing in there that requires him, for example, to recuse himself, which you would think would be natural. If you were being accused of ethical wrongdoing, you would think there'd be something in the law, or at least in their House rules, that say when that happens, you got to bail out and somebody else takes over. It's not like that, and that's a lot of the problem that goes on, which I call maybe characterized as legal corruption, and our president of the Policy Council has talked about this as well, and it sounds kind of strange to put legal and corruption together, but I think that's a large part what's going on. And that's what that we try to point out the NERV, all these things that happen that, you know, give them that advantage. For example, legislative exemptions under the FOI that allows them to withhold their correspondence. I mean, these are things that allow them to do stuff in secret. And there's all kinds of things like that that give them, you know, a lot more authority than I think most folks think they should have. And so it's, I guess, you know, if you could say that in some sense the system is rigged. And that's what we're trying to fight all the time, is trying to point out how, you know, how this system is rigged, you know, and how they abuse the process. I had a case just on legislation alone that on the last day of regular session, normally a bill has to go through a subcommittee and committee process, and we were on a 2-year cycle at the legislature. So in a lot of cases, it can take 2 years for something to get through. Well, on the last day of regular session, this past legislation, the General Assembly was able to cram something through for the first time in several hours. Well, how'd they do that? Well, they took a bill, an unrelated bill that had gone through the whole process, gutted it, and stuck in what they want and shipped it through. And what was it that they did? Well, it was nice tax credits, okay, for major tire manufacturers on the purchase of machinery, which was nice for the tire manufacturers, but nobody else gets that kind of treatment. And, you know, this is the kind of, is what they did, was that illegal? Could they do that? Well, yeah, they could, you know, but that's how the system is set up. If there was something that said, you can't do that, you know, at the last moment, they obviously couldn't, but they can, so they do. And this is just the kind of little stuff that goes on all the time that people don't know about. Things like, you know, lawmakers going around and saying, well, I earn only $10,400 a year, okay? Well, that's not true, okay? They're all little kinds of pots of money that they all can tap into that they don't want to tell you about. One's called in-district expenses. You know, that sounds, you know, like they're just paying for expenses. No, they just take the money, okay, and it's actual income. They get subsistence payments for hotels and meals while while the legislature's in session, $131 a day. Well, maybe that makes sense from somebody who's coming from Spartanburg. But what about somebody who lives within 10 miles of the Capitol? I've done several stories on that. You know, is that illegal? No, they're taking it though. And, well, yeah, you can make the argument that it is immoral. We have 2 new Midlands lawmakers who at least said on the record that I'm not going to take that. But that took several years of reporting, keep pounding and pointing that out, that they're still taking that money. That doesn't sound like much, but it adds up over time. It's thousands of dollars. So, I mean, it's all, there's just so much that they do under the current system that is not in the best interest of taxpayers, is not in the best interest of freedom or democracy. And that's why I get passionate, you know, when I start talking about this stuff, because ultimately this is what it's about, okay? This is about freedom, this is about democracy, and when you have a system that's rigged like this, okay, it hurts that cause. And, you know, as long as I can, you know, I'm committed to keep exposing this stuff all the time. And it's not just the legislative branch, it's the executive branch, it's the judicial branch. Lots of things on, you know, on all 3 branches. I did, early on, I did a story, the Judicial Department several years ago called in the American Bar Association to do an assessment of its disciplinary process for judges, okay? And the ABA came up with a bunch of recommendations, and the Supreme Court signed off on most of them, except one they didn't want to talk about was the ABA recommended that when the Supreme Court justices themselves are accused of an ethical violation, there should be an independent body that deals with that. Well, they didn't accept that. And I was the only one who wrote about that they didn't accept it. These are the kinds of things that, you know, that I think need to be pointed out all the time. And it just goes, you know, it goes on and on. Even when you take a look at the judicial system, the way our judges are selected. We are, South Carolina and Virginia are the only states where the legislators play a primary role in, you know, in selecting judges, most of the judges in the state, the higher level judges. And, you know, if you talk to a lot of folks in the legal community, they'll tell you, you know, they support the current system, and everything's okay. I talk to a lot of people who are not lawyers, and they think that what we do is bizarre and wrong. Because there are even outside legal groups that say the way we do it is not right. And I've written about that. You know, we have a judicial screening committee that's made up primarily of lawmakers that are appointed by 3 lawmakers, that all the powers are. One of them happens to be Bobby Harrell, okay, who appointed his own brother to the screening committee. So,
unbelievable.
Right, and it's one of these things that, you know, and outside legal groups, including the ABA and the American Judicature Society, have said we don't have even a true merit selection system because it's so legislative dominated. So this is the kind of stuff that we like to point out all the time. Structural problems in the system. And then if we can actually find, you know, specific examples of potential problems, we'll point that out as well. Harold, you know, being kind of the latest example of a lot of things that we're questioning.
Do you think that the use of FOIA by citizens like us is a good and productive tool? For example, at the end of the last legislative session, many of us sent in FOIA requests for our legislators' correspondence on the Department of Administration bill. Now, is that just looked at as an annoyance? Does it actually move anything? Is that something we should be doing more of?
Well, and I actually wrote a story on that effort, on the citizen effort for Department of Administration FOIA. I admired everybody who did that. I knew it was going to not work because, again, when you're dealing with lawmakers, they're going to claim that legislative exemption. And that, again, goes back to the structural problem that we have in the FOIA law. I think my recommendation would be, look, you know, if people would just be nice and you just go up there, you know, to their local agency and ask them for it without a FOIA, then try that first. But in the end, if they're going to tell you no, then you're going to have to try to force their hand through the FOIA. And I would recommend, I wish you didn't have to do it, but I think you're going to, you know, if you're going to be citizen journalists, you're going to have to get familiar with it. You're going to have to try to use it. Is it an easy road? No, it's not. We had a citizen reporter, Alberta Wasden, who's an accountant, and her business, her office is located in the town of Swansea, and she tried to, several years ago, submitted a FOIA for a lot of financial records there. They came back and said, sure, we'll give it to you, $10,000. $10,000, that made national news. Can you, even in my career, I never had that kind of a bill. I mean, I've had several $1,000s, but not $10,000. But that's the kind of thing that you'll face. And but I think it's important. I do think it's important to fight that fight. And if you don't have to be a lawyer to file these requests. Are there times when you may need a lawyer to help fight on the back end? Possibly. But at least on the front end, you don't need to do that. You just need to make the request and be vigilant in telling them about the FOI. And getting back to that, I don't like to use this option, but there is in the FOIA law a little section in there that deals with criminal penalties for failure to comply. Right now, it's classified as a misdemeanor offense. You could get up to 30 days in jail or a $100 fine. The bill that's going through the legislature right now wouldn't do anything on the jail side, but it would increase the fines, okay, for each level. That's rarely been, been successful in this state. It's rarely been used. In fact, I don't think it even has been successful in terms of getting a government official prosecuted criminally under the FOI. But I can tell you this as a bit of a strategy. It has loosened up some agencies in giving information when I believe they are deliberately ignoring me or deliberately withholding. I said, you realize that there are criminal penalties for doing this. And most of the time I tend to get the information when I do that. There are some journalists I found over the years that they'll just automatically put that in their FOI request, that, they will cite the criminal statutes right in there to try to put the fear of God into them right from the start. So I don't think there's any set way to do it, but that's just something to keep in mind.
Is it better to do it by email or just by regular letter?
It just depends. Some are informal enough that they'll say, fine, shoot me an email. I've had agencies say, no, I'm not going to send that email. You're going to have to send a letter that you've signed. For agencies I don't trust, I do it both ways. I'll do a letter, sign it, make a scan it, send it to them email, and then send the original snail mail, and so that they can't claim that they didn't get one or the other. So,
all right.
Does anyone else have some?
Last question, and then we're going to have to break.
I may or may not know this, but how is the corruption in South Carolina compared to other states? And the Budget and Control Board, are we the only state that has a Budget and Control Board?
We are believed, to be the only state that kind of has this kind of creature. It's kind of quasi-executive, quasi-legislative body. It's believed to be unique. In terms of corruption, there are other states that have obviously plenty of corruption. Can't really quantify how our state does. There's just plenty there for, to keep me busy, I think, for many, many years. But the Budget Control Board is a very unique, kind of body, and it has a whole lot of authority. There is a movement to try to get rid of it. I'm not certain the legislative fix is really doing it, or is it just creating another body, with the same, different name, but with the same powers. And that's, citizen journalists, you have to keep a close eye on that. We have a story, by the way, on that going Monday.
Just real quickly, how is the letter treated by other supposed reporters and news agencies in South Carolina?
Well, believe it or not, the small papers around this state like us a lot. We've been published, reprinted in a number of small papers because they don't have the staff, to do investigative work. The large papers will pay attention to what we're doing, but they won't credit us with anything. For competitive reasons, I think. So that's, and I spent years on that side of the fence, so I know how they think. But it's okay, we're gonna keep doing our thing, no matter what.
All right. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.